Alright guys, first of all, Happy New Year's to all of you. I know that there's a huge line out there, and until that time we'll be kicking off. Please allow me to welcome you. I'll be straight away jumping to the agenda because you're actually started 10 minutes late. So please allow me to welcome Dave, who's the Principal Security Partner SA PJ at AWS. Will be our first speaker, and followed by Owen. Owen calls himself a cloud professional and a cynic, which is interesting to me. Would want to learn more about that though. So, without further ado, Dave, the podium is yours, mate. And we'll be taking any questions at the back of the presentations. Ideally, I would suggest if you can ask the questions after the presentation, that would be good, so that the process goes smooth. Thanks, guys.
Okay, everyone hear me all right? Okay, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to AWS. Welcome to the first Sydney user group meetup of 2024. We've got a few people waiting to come in, but hopefully everyone can hear. And yeah, we're hopefully getting a great session. Looking forward to hearing Owen talk later on about the enterprise side of things. My focus today more on the small end of town, the startups. So a little bit about me. My name's Dave. I am a Principal Partner Solution Architect focused on security. So my job is to help our startup customers adopt AWS partner solutions that fit their life stage, their compliance goals, and just to make sure that we've got the right tools and services in market to support our startup customers along their journey and their growth. So as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm originally from England. Sheffield, if anyone knows England very well, up north. I'm a security containers SME here at AWS. I've had 20 plus years in IT, so my IT career is it can drink and drive in all the states in the country. There's also probably people here who weren't even born when I got my first job, which is massively depressing. I started out doing help desk, systems and network engineering, all kinds of things. First used AWS in 2011 when I thought I should try this cloud thing out. And my 5 years at AWS will be coming up in March, which is super exciting. Get that orange badge, but I actually forgot my badge today anyway, so it wouldn't have mattered. So before we start, I'm going to blow off some of those Christmas cobwebs with a little bit of audience participation, which I know everyone hates, so it'll be very quick. Does anyone here have a personal AWS account? Let's put hands up. Now keep your hand up if you have got an IAM user in there that you're using to do day-to-day tasks. And then keep your hand up still if you are using MFA, multi-factor authentication for that user, and if you've got a billing alert configured for your account. Okay, anyone with a hand still up, come and see me at the end. I've got some tips for you. You're officially better at this than a lot of customers that I talk to on a day-to-day basis. So this is a quote from an actual real CTO in the US. When we finished our product, we'll do security then. And actually, this is something we could have taken this quote from a large number of customers that we talk to. And it's a very common thing. I think very often, startups particularly are making trade-offs and decisions about prioritization, about where to put limited resources, limited funding. Non-functional requirements often go on the tech debt pile, and that would include security. And to be honest, it's not always the right way to go. It's probably never the right way to go, to be honest. And if nothing else, just imagine the situation where you've built your product, you've got your first meeting with a big customer, and the first thing they say is, okay, this great product, where's your SOC 2 cert? Or fill out this 600 question RFP to go through our procurement process. And the startup is like, we don't do any of these things. Dave, help. And if you get those things right, it's not just a benefit to you, to your investors and shareholders, it's also a benefit to the business in terms of accelerating development by enabling developers to work faster and be secure by using guardrails, but also around helping accelerate sales pipeline. Now, a lot of these things are primarily around, I'm focused on startup customers and what they need. And we did build this baseline, startup security baseline, specifically for those early stage startups. But what I found through a large number of conversations is that actually most large customers, digital natives, enterprises aren't doing most of these things either, or at least they're not doing all of them. I'm yet to speak to one customer who's implemented all 27 controls. And what we built this around was to give startups specifically a really prescriptive, simple set of controls that they can use to mitigate the most common risks that startups face. Generally, it isn't a motivated single target attacker going after your startup. It is a exposed access key. It is credential stuffing of your email and passwords. You don't have anything turned on. It's those kind of things, and those are really simple and easy to fix. And getting the foundation right allows you to then grow as a business more confidently. It wouldn't be a security conversation about AWS without this picture, this shared responsibility model. We talk about it a lot. It's a very powerful mental model to help customers understand what's required of them if they want to operate securely in AWS. And as you've probably heard a million times, it breaks down to AWS look after the security of the cloud, the physical data centers, the hardware, all the things that make the AWS cloud the best place to build secure workloads, and then giving customers the tools to implement their security controls on top of that. And customers obviously have to look after their IAM policies, their patching, all the things that have to happen in a well-governed account to keep it secure. And something to talk about here just quickly is that actually this line in this diagram, it actually moves around. So you can materially improve your security posture simply by making better choices of technology. So for example, if you're running containers, can you run Fargate? If you use Fargate, we take on a large number of the things around host security, for example. If you're using Lambda, again, we abstract away pretty much all of the, well, everything that isn't the code, which makes it, again, much easier to meet compliance goals, and we see a lot of regulated customers using those serverless containers or serverless functions to help them accelerate the compliance outcomes. And ultimately, security can feel like a pretty complex topic, but really, you can break it down primarily to these three things. Who can access what? So which identities, which resources, which compute can access, perform operations against, which resources, so S3 buckets, databases. If you can get on top of this, then pretty much your security will follow pretty easily. And with AWS, what we have here is your job is to specify those controls. So you use IAM or you use something like Cedar through our new verified permissions tool. You can maybe use resource-based policies on your S3 buckets or KMS keys to specify what is allowed to happen, and then our job is to enforce that. And one of the biggest things that we do is make sure that enforcement works every time for every call. And we validate every single API call, like billions a second globally, against the rules that you set in your accounts. And all this is driving towards this foundational principle of security, the principle of least privilege. Essentially, every identity, every resource, every user needs the privileges to perform its task and no more. And so many problems we see with security literally come down to overly permissive policies, or people using the root user for everything, or people using the admin user for everything. It's easy, it's quick, but it also opens up a large number of potential risks as a business. So the Startup Security Baseline, it's based on literally tens of thousands of conversations that we've had with startups of all sizes, and what we call a startup gets to be pretty big businesses, billion-dollar companies. We've talked to them, we've found out what's important to them, where they're struggling around security, and we've given them this prescriptive guidance to make sure that they can get these things right, get the foundations right, give them something to build on. There are 27 controls, there's 12 account level, 15 workload level. Today we're only going to go through the account level controls, although you can find the rest of them in the documentation, and I'll share the link again at the end. So we're going to dive straight in. First one, account level context. Now, is this a security control? Well, of course it is. If we discover a security problem or a billing problem, we're going to reach out to the contacts that are in the account. So many times incidents are extended because we can't reach someone at the company, because the email address associated with the account is an email address of a contractor who set it up, or the CTO who left a year ago. And that just means that these incidents get extended, the issues are worse for customers, recovery is harder. Getting this right is foundational to all the things we're going to talk about afterwards. And we see some customers say, well, actually, we've got 10 accounts, we've got 50 accounts. It's too hard for us to manage this at scale, and things get missed. So in 2022, I think it was, we added a feature to organizations to let you manage these programmatically through the API. If you didn't know this, it's super useful to know. And I think there's also Terraform support for this, I think. But essentially you can map these contact details onto all the accounts programmatically. A couple of pro tips: use your company domain, don't use Gmail, don't use the same email address that you use to buy your socks on Amazon. One of the biggest challenges we see is credential stuffing. There are so many password breaches, so many passwords and email addresses available on the internet now, on the dark web. People get those, they'll try them against the AWS control plane and then get to your account. Pretty much game over. So having a company domain for this, an account which is designed specifically for managing AWS, super important. And you think about not just startups, any business, there's going to be churn, people move to new roles, people join, people leave. Using a distribution list for this rather than an individual user is always a good idea. So I would definitely recommend doing that. And if you're not, going and doing that. Use of the root user, we see customers, even big customers, still using the root account to log in and do day-to-day things. If you're doing that today, please stop. There are now, I think, only 7 things that need the root user's credentials to perform. Like changing support level, I think, is one. There are a few others. Almost everything else can be done with an IAM user. So with root, give it a strong password, enable MFA. If you're now a distributed team, we realized that would be a problem with the old model of putting a token in a safe. So now you can add up to 8 MFA tokens to the root account. So you can distribute that between your team, and then don't use it. Create IAM users for everything. Don't you reuse accounts. And that is one of the key things that we see customers making mistakes on, leaving that root user active and available. And one tip here is there are a number of enterprise password managers which support MFA or TOTP code generation. So you can literally have your root user and password and your MFA token available through an enterprise password manager. Often there's break glass support where you can get alerts if they're used. It's a very good way of securing that and keeping it not written down or not on someone's laptop. When we talk about configuring console access, really what we're talking about here is just creating individual users. And this can lead on to another kind of core principle of security, which is the idea of non-repudiation. So I should not, as a user, be able to do something and then deny that I did it. If you're using the root user, if you're using a shared account, then I can always say, well, it wasn't me, it was John that did that. And there's no real way of proving it, it's much harder. So making sure everyone who's interacting with AWS has an individual named account that only they use and that sharing is not allowed. Make sure that MFA is enforced for all users to avoid things like credential stuffing. And then, if possible, using something like AWS, it says single sign-on here, it's actually called Identity Center for IAM now. Anyway, it's called something else, but essentially that allows you to define all your users in one place and then give access to all of your accounts. Some people might be using Okta for this, some people might be using OneLogin or Ping Federate or Azure AD, and ADFS. Whatever you're using, if you can get that working, account federation with a centralized identity, that is the gold standard. That is as good as anything that banks, even like government and NatSec are using. And that is the best way to protect your account. Password policy, I mean, ideally, you've got MFA. Is password policy so important? I mean, it's still got to be strong, right? But it don't require 128 characters and changing every 7 days, because people won't do it. And I think the recommendation now is every year to have those password expiry, because actually you find that forcing rotation makes people choose weaker passwords because they put an iterator on the end, which makes the entropy less. So we definitely recommend doing that. You can do it in AWS with password policy, you can do it in Identity Center, and you can do it in things like Okta as well. Logging events. So who here knows what CloudTrail is? Not bad, not bad. So CloudTrail is essentially the key for finding out what's happening in your account. It is a service which logs all control plane activity within AWS. So essentially, if someone runs EC2 run instance, for example, that will be logged along with all the context about which user made the call, when it was made, was it successful, and all the information about what instances were created. If you have an incident, you need to be able to go back and find out how the person got in, what they did, so you can then go and undo it. And that's things like if they're trying to establish persistence or creating Lambda functions or spinning up Bitcoin miners. CloudTrail is the way that you can find out how they got in, revoke that key, delete the resources. It's also very important for things like data breach notifications. So if you have data breach and you don't have logging of which files were accessed in S3, for example, then it's going to be much harder for you to explain to the regulator what happened. If you can say, well, actually, they logged in, but they didn't access any of this sensitive data, that could be the difference between no enforcement and a significant financial penalty. So CloudTrail isn't just necessary, it's also very important when it comes to saving money in that kind of situation. By default, you get 90 days in the console. I recommend turning on CloudTrail. I have it on in my personal account. The first trail is free, and all you pay for is the S3 storage. And then you can search it with something like Athena, and there's blogs on how to do that. But turn it on, even if you never use it, I would consider it that a win, personally. And then another pro tip here is you can change how you're using it for production versus non-production. There are a certain number of high volume things like data access, KMS key access, which could generate significant cost in a non-production account. But you can turn those off, but make sure that you've got those KMS and S3 data events enabled in your production, because that's where they're most important. Now, has anyone here read about an incident where someone has downloaded sensitive data, corporate data, from a public S3 bucket? It happens quite a lot. And some people use like funky naming for S3 as a way of protecting them. That the whole kind of security by obscurity thing doesn't really work very well. And to be honest, there are almost no use cases where open public access to an S3 bucket is actually required to implement it. There's almost always another way, like signed URLs or using CloudFront in front of the S3 bucket potentially with some authorization, or using a cross-account role. There are so many different ways you can protect this. So we recommend turning on block public access. It is now on by default, but if you've got older buckets, it needs to go back and turn it on manually. You can also turn it on at the account level to make sure that no newly created buckets can have public access enabled for them. And there's so this is what that looks like, the 4 controls here. But as I mentioned, those do not apply to existing buckets. If you want to know if you have any exposed buckets in your account, Amazon Macy has a S3 bucket discovery function, which will tell you all the buckets you've got in your account and whether they're publicly accessible or not, using some pretty funky tool in the background called Zelkova, which is far too complicated for me to understand, let alone explain. And then this is just something, this is less relevant nowadays. Most customers aren't using ACLs. You may know S3 predates IAM by several years. So it had a secondary access mechanism called ACLs. If you see that authenticated users have access to your bucket, that doesn't mean your users are authenticated to your account. That means any user anywhere in AWS who's authenticated can access that bucket. And I've seen a lot of customers say, oh, only people in my account can access this because I've got this turned on. It's like, that's not how it works. So pro tip, check that. Deleting unused resources, I mean, it's partially security control. I'd say mostly it's better operational practice. I mean, you probably shouldn't be using the default VPC in most cases because it defaults to putting public IPs on all your resources. If nothing else, we're now billing for IPv4 addresses. So you want as much as possible in private subnets. But also, anything you've got which you're not using is potentially a vector for either discovery or for access for an unwanted individual. So if you're not using it, just delete it. And we've added this EC2 global view. Not many customers know about this. You can find it in the console. It lets you easily find resources across all of the regions in AWS, and then you can delete them if needed. Budgets. A few people had their hands up for this. It's great. Now, in an ideal world, you would have defense in depth. You'd have multiple levels of control of your account. But controls can fail, and sometimes multiple controls can fail. So even if you've got strong access controls and MFA, it's possible someone makes a mistake and some malicious access is granted, and someone creates a load of Bitcoin miners in your account. This is bad. It also happens. And so a great early warning signal for this is having a budget. If you know that you're spending $200 a month, and then suddenly your bill goes to $10,000 a month, you probably want to know that before it gets to the 31st and you get the bill, or it comes off your credit card or invoice. So enabling budgets is a really great way of doing that. If you've got a very variable workload, you can also use cost anomaly detection. It's free. It essentially runs in your account, looks at what you're spending, baselines it, and then uses machine learning to look for outliers. So it can sometimes, for example, if you start using a new service, like you turn on SageMaker, it might go, oh, there's new spend here. But overall, it's probably better to have it than not. And it's a free thing, so you can try it. I also wanted to mention quickly guard duty. If you're not using guard duty and you've got any kind of production system, you should probably be questioning that decision. Guard duty is an excellent tool, and for the cost, it is, I would say, a no-brainer for pretty much any production workload. What guard duty does is it looks at a number of data sources, and it uses a combination of heuristics and machine learning to look for indicators of compromise in the account. Some examples here might be unexpected outbound calls to algorithmically generated domain names. That is often an indicator of malware command and control traffic. Or it might look for Bitcoin mining traffic in the account. And it flags those up so you can go and fix them. Without this, you are pretty much blind as to what's happening in that account, unless you've got a third-party tool. So a bit more detail here about how it works. You see the findings on the left. You've got VPC flow logs, you've got Route 53 VPC resolver logs. You've got CloudTrail, which we talked about before. You've got S3 data plane events, so looking for things like unexpected data egress. And you've got your EKS control plane and data plane logs, if you're using EKS. That gives you that both control plane, so looking at the Kubernetes control plane logs, but also now we have data plane, which are looking at calls being made by containers inside your cluster. And we continue to add new findings and new capabilities to guard duty all the time. So we recommend turning it on in all regions, purely because, just because you're not using the Sao Paulo region doesn't mean someone else in your account doesn't want to. So make sure you've got visibility in all regions, not just the ones that you are operating in. Another recommendation here, if you're using organizations, is to use SCPs and actually block those regions from being used. That's not on this sheet, but I might add it for the next revision. If you scan that QR code, we've got a cool little script which essentially helps to turn on guard duty in all your accounts and regions within your organization. And then the last thing I'm going to mention, Trusted Advisor. I think it's highly underused by customers. If you're on basic or developer support, you get, I think, 6 security checks and 30 total checks manually refreshed when you go into the tool. If you have business support or higher, you get, I think, 115 checks across security, customization, resilience, and some other stuff. And they are really great ways of making sure that you've got a handle on what's happening in the account. And basically, they are free, value add to the account you've already got. And it's worth checking them and looking for issues, because we do see a few things in there which you should be fixing. Now, it's a bit of a rattle through, because this is actually an hour presentation, and I've only got 25 minutes to do it in, or half an hour to do it in. So I'm not going to go through the workload controls in detail. You can find them on the link I shared before, and I'll share again at the end. I just want to call out 2 things. This one, using IAM roles for permissions. If you are generating access keys, storing them in config files, then please stop. There are so many better ways of doing it. So you can put, you can use a role, assign a role to your Lambda function, your ECS task, your EKS pod, your EC2 instance, and they can get roles just for them. It's so much better than having those access keys stored in a config file, and I see that a lot. And then all it needs is a web server misconfiguration, and that config file is exposed, and someone's in the account doing whatever it is they would like to do. The other thing, here's our CTO Werner, encrypts everything. I think another quote is, it's a dance like no one's watching, encrypt like everyone is. But whichever quote you want to use, it's so easy now to basically enable encryption on EBS, on S3, on Dynamo. It checks a lot of your compliance boxes, and it just makes everything a bit safer. And again, there's really no reason not to do it nowadays. We started with a really bad quote about security. I just wanted to finish with a really good quote, which is, we've got a CTO here, they've been through the SSP, they've found an issue around brute force access to SSH, and they've implemented Systems Manager, Session Manager for the remote access, which doesn't need a port opening, and it's all done through IAM, and that's a great first step or a great next step. And this SSP is all about a checklist to make sure that you've got the foundations in place to then build a great security story for your business. This is the link for the baseline itself. We bookmark it. So even if you're not with a startup, even if you've got 100,000 employees, it's still great, I think, to have this checklist to make sure that new workloads and new accounts are being provisioned in the right way. And then the last thing I wanted to do is, if you can, I'd love you to leave some feedback. We run these events for you. If you're not getting the value you need, if you're not getting the support you need, we need to make them better. We can only do that if you tell us how. And with that, that's the end. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I'm there. If you want to come find me on LinkedIn. I want to be respectful of Owen's time, but I'm very happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Sorry? Yeah. Okay, well, clearly I've explained that really well. Well, I hope so anyway. Well, look, thank you everyone. It's been a pleasure to come and speak to you. Hopefully we can do it again soon. And yeah, with no further ado, let's hand over to our next speaker, Owen.
Can people hear me? Yes. Hello, my name is Barton Collins. I am speaking in an individual capacity for various commercial reasons. My current employer is not a major AWS customer. Won't go into that. I have been around the AWS ecosystem. I just looked up and I got my architecture certification in 2014. So it is well and truly out of date now, but I was capable of answering technical questions at one stage. As I said, I spent 25 years in IT. Started off in Unix system administration, moved into storage, mainly because no one else was willing to do it, and I could do it fairly well. And then into cloud and it's the obvious progression for someone who's got an infrastructure background. Most of my time's been spent in large enterprises, financial services, bit of government, and retail. So I'm coming from the big end of town. Think one department for everything. For a lot of you guys that are in the startup, builder, technical ecosystem, it is the dynamic opposite. So I've structured this talk in such a way that it is pretty much the complement or opposite of where we're coming in from the startup ecosystem. There's a few things I want to be clear that I'm not. I'm not actually a cybersecurity professional. My talk here is helping you deal with cybersecurity, particularly those of you who've got a dedicated cybersecurity person or team. And I'm certainly not a marketing expert. The other thing that I didn't write here is I'm not a developer. I can write code, but I have neither the accuracy, speed, or background knowledge to do it. And I committed a serious sin this afternoon by using an Excel sheet to generate a series of CLI options to update a piece of code and then submit a patch that I couldn't do manually. So that gives you an idea of my technical competence. This is the blurb for the presentation you may have seen. Oops. My highlights didn't come through. The key points here is, how do you get your job done? A lot of times cybersecurity is seen as a boat anchor, it's to slow you down. There are reasons for that. You want to succeed and be valued, but you also need to deliver a secure environment, and you need to work with the people that are there. So the purpose of this talk is not to give you a technical foundation in security. It's not to teach you the nitty-gritty of what you need to do. It's I'm trying to give you some advice as to how to deliver a secure product quickly and efficiently and work in an organisation so that you can get your job done. And cyber doesn't have to be a boat anchor. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of war stories, shall we say, try to spice up the conversation, but also to say this is relevant. This is actually based on experience and things that have really happened to me. But I'm not going to name names. I'm not going to give details that are going to allow you to identify the environments. That's for a couple of reasons. It protects me, so I don't get in trouble, but it also protects the customers that I've worked for. I don't want people knowing what they've stuffed up and where their practices are weak and potentially making them vulnerable themselves. And I just suggest you think about that as well in the whole concept of security. Security isn't a security setting. A company is vulnerable when they've got bad practices. If you know what a company is bad at, you know what to target. That can help you improve your own organisation, but don't go blabbing about how bad your password policies in your organisation, because that's just going to ultimately hurt you in the long run. This is the reality between developers and cybersecurity in a lot of organisations. You've got different objectives. Cybersecurity job is just basically to stop the organisation getting damaged. Developers, your job is to get you've got a business coming on your back saying, we need to get products out there, we need to get bugs fixed. Can we turn the volume down? Get a bit of feedback. Yeah, we need to get bugs fixed, we need to ship code basically. Sorry about that. I just wanted to get that fixed before I deafen everyone with feedback. And it's really important to understand that both people have got a valid job. Cyber's job isn't there to make your life hard. They're there to protect the organisation. But cybersecurity have got a really big problem. They can't actually protect the organisation. They don't control the code, they can't change systems, they can't do the testing. They can only do things indirectly by making you do things. And in a lot of organisations, the only power that cybersecurity actually have is saying no. They can't do anything by themselves. Pulling on the proverbial handbrake to stop the car hitting them, crossing the lane and heading into oncoming traffic is all they can do. They can't steer. That's what you guys do. So think of cybersecurity as sitting in the passenger seat, and if you guys do their job properly, they're completely irrelevant. They're just there like a driving test instructor. But you've got to understand that they can't build security for you. All they can do is yank that handbrake. If they're yanking the handbrake for bad reasons, well, you need to talk to them. But it's the fundamental thing people don't get about cyber, is they've got a whole bunch of responsibility, they're accountable things, but they've got no authority to actually make the changes required to succeed at their job. It's a horrible job to be in, but it's really important that in a large organisation, you understand the motivations and pressure that people have. The other challenge that cyber have got is, I think in worst cases, a lot of the events they're protecting against are really low probability, but they're really bad impact, they're really high impact. It's the whole, oh, it'll never happen, or I'll take this risk this time, I'll speed this time because I'm running a little bit late. Humans are really bad at calculating risk. And most of the time, cyber's going to say, this is a problem, you shouldn't do it. And 99% of the problem, 99% of the time, things they point out aren't going to happen. This is how cyber work. This is how a lot of organisations work. I don't know, how many people have got any experience in formal risk management? Okay, a few hands. Has anybody seen a table like this before? Okay, a few more hands. Most businesses operate this way. This is not an IT security thing. Most businesses operate this outside of the cyber security environment. But the consideration is, what is the likelihood of something happening? and what is the potential impact? Now, usually there'll be more than 3 columns on each one, and there'll obviously different grades and how things get rated vary in different organisations, but there'll be something. So things that come down in this quality and this corner, these are the things that get screamed at. These are the things you've got to fix right away. You're over here, there's a problem. Now, no organisation I have worked for has been able to answer the question, how many low risks equal a medium, or how many mediums equal a high? Now, that's, to my mind, a mature risk organisation should be able to do that. And I've done work either direct or consulting in a number of the big banks, a number of the big organisations, a number of Australia's big organisations, ASX 100s. And none of the risk people I've spoken to have been able to articulate that. What I have had is a conversation with the chief risk manager of one of the 4 banks talking about disaster recovery and data centre preparedness. And the comment was, while we consider this a serious issue, we obviously need to be prepared. We think a complete data centre loss is a 1 in 100 year event, and it's not the top of our list. It's in this category. It's not the things that are going to put them out. It's not the thing that's going to put them in front of the RBA or drag them in front of Parliament. It's important, but not critical. And my response to that was, how many data centres do you operate at the moment? And the answer was, depending on what you consider a data centre, between 8 and 11. And that changes the economics of 1 in 100 years. It brings it down sort of around the 1 in 10, depending on how you do the maths. And that's really important because that means this could happen while I am in this job. And again, about personal incentives, when you talk about something that's probably not going to happen while I'm in this seat and someone else will have to deal with it, it's a very different calculus. As I said, dealing with low probability, high impact. This is another thing that you're going to end up dealing with. Mitigations. Something could go wrong. We can't fix it completely, but we can do something to sort of fix it. And this is where the horse trading comes in. I've got a high risk, but if I do X and Y, I can drop it down to a medium. The other thing that you need to consider, ultimately everything's going to come down to money. Like I said, when you talk about that risk matrix, when you talk about, we don't use MFA on all our admin accounts. How big a risk is that? How does that compare to the fact I've got a warehouse that could flood it, or my logistics provider is about to jack their prices up by 20% and that's going to put us out of the market? From a security perspective, that's what you're competing against, is what else can I spend that money on to fix it? And even when it comes to slowing development, if that says this product won't go live for another 2 months because I could go back and fix all these security issues, that's bad from it. Again, back in my infrastructure days, we had a project where if we don't get this infrastructure stood up and going, this application won't launch, and we won't be able to launch this product in these countries, coming from financial institutions. That's an awful lot of pressure for you to do things. It's an awful lot of pressure to take security shortcuts and deliver something anyway, and then maybe go back and fix it up later. But if you get it right the first time, it's a lot cheaper than going back. But that's the calculus people are actually thinking about. So when you get past savour into management, it's what is this going to cost me? What is it going to cost me if this goes bad? If I hit the front page, what is this? What is the impact? What is it going to hit the share price? And am I going to keep my job? For those of you who can't see, this is a hotel with some serious damage. Now, this is before my time, but the quote from it is really lucky. Who knows who Margaret Thatcher is?
Prime Minister of England.
Correct. In 1984, the Conservative Party were having their conference in Brighton, and the IRA detonated a bomb which caused that damage. Now, Margaret Thatcher happened to be Her suite was damaged. Apparently the bathroom got destroyed in part of the bedroom, but she wasn't in there. She was working in an office in the suite. Got out of there, things worked pretty well. IRA issued a statement basically saying, you were lucky, but you have to be lucky every time. We only have to be lucky once. Think about that from a defence perspective. Yeah, you could be lucky, but the people out there, they've only got to find one issue. How many issues do you think you have in your environment? I can guarantee you you've got a lot. A lot of them you don't even know about. Now, it doesn't always mean that the attacker has got the advantage, but it's really the mindset you need to go into this, and it's really the mindset that cyber are going into this, is everything they leave there that isn't fixed could blow up. Where you're thinking, oh, that's trivial, the chances of that being hit is very low. Or that, yeah, this is not going to do much by itself, they'll need to chain a whole bunch of other vulnerabilities together. But again, it comes how many small risks become a big risk. This is where checklists come in place. Now, the title of this slide that I had originally was "The Boring Stuff Matters." This is a checklist from 737. When a pilot goes to take off, there are an awful lot of things they've got to go through and check. One of the things they haven't been checking, at least on some models, are whether all the doors have been bolted in securely. I flew on a 737 the other day, and I'm like quickly sending a message out saying, can I tell if I'm sitting next to a door plug or not? These are boring as batshit, sorry, just be frank. There are a whole bunch of security standards. You can go out to NIST, you can go out to the CIS benchmarks and say, do this, do this, do this, do this. They're even worse when you score them. If you go out to an existing environment and compare against one of these benchmarks, like it's a fire hose. If you go to an enterprise environment and take a benchmark, take a cloud security posture management tool, you're going to get hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of violations. But each one of these things matters. If you can tick them off as you go, again, it's that whole risk perspective. Only one thing has to go wrong. Your attacker's only got to find the one vulnerability, but you've got to get everything right to make sure that there's nothing there. And this is where your cyber department is chasing it. And again, you're not going to be able to cover everything off, and then that goes back to your risk discussion and saying, is this worth fixing? Is the risk we're taking worth it from a business perspective? Cyber are not going to answer that, but if you can go back to your management and describe that. The other point I just wanted to make around this is for a plane. This is for everything in that model. You guys are building applications, specific systems. Checklist isn't going to cover that. You can build an application that does a particular thing and stick it. Yeah, it's not going to cover application logic. If you allow someone to edit the quantity in a shopping cart and it doesn't update the price on the invoice, that's not something that a checklist is going to pick up. So again, this isn't about saying your application development is important or it's not important. It's not saying that your infrastructure checklist and all the baseline stuff is or is not important. Security is about delivering both. But again, this is what your cyber team knows. They don't know your application, but they do know the standards that everybody else has to comply with, and this is what they're going to hammer with. Your job is to make sure that you're dealing with both parts of that. Somebody used this already. I was going to use the example. Yeah, the typical S3 bucket. So I'm just dumping to my notes. I'm going to go back to the days, and this is one case where I will identify. It was when I was at university, several decades ago, and for whatever reason I needed to access a file that wasn't in my home directory via a web server, so I just created a link into my home directory pointing at the root of the file system so I could go and browse it. And I forgot to take it out until somebody else found it and came and said, don't do this, it's really naughty. Took a shortcut, forgot to clean it up. It happens. Big issues. Come back to an organisation after a period of time not there. So needed access to a particular system account. This is in the 2000s. Found out the password was still the same when I had left that organisation 4 years ago. That password hadn't changed the entire time that I was there. So for about 6 to 7 years ago, there was a system admin password on every production server that was the same, and anyone who'd been in an admin function in nearly over half a decade knew what that password was. What does that do to confidentiality, or let alone integrity of any of the data? And the other one about public exposure, and this was a serious pain, again, not a big organisation. We had an odd backup restore request from security. Somebody had left some data somewhere where they shouldn't. And as part of the response, the operations team had to restore the access logs for 4 different web servers for, I can't remember, it was for a 3-year or 5-year period, so that they could be loaded and analysed to validate that no one had actually downloaded that particular data when it was available or not. Because if they had, it would be a regulator issue. 500 distinct restore jobs later, all the data was pulled out, it was restored back into the log directory, and that night was automatically deleted when the log rotation script ran at midnight, and the entire restore had to be redone the next day so the analysis could be completed. These things really do happen. I'm sorry. And this is the really boring stuff about don't put important data in a directory that's world readable. Don't have stuff access to the internet. So they're the most common issues. And they do cause real pain. This is probably going to be difficult for a lot of people because your function in your organisation is important. So is everybody else's. It's very unlikely you're working for a project or an application or a system that's make or break for your organisation, that is the most important system, and everything else is going to be sacrificed. The number one thing for cybersecurity is not you. It's not your application being compromised. It's not even your infrastructure being compromised. It is the threat that your environment poses to everyone else in the organisation. It is if you get hacked, you then represent a threat to everybody else. So it's not just I'm vulnerable. It's you are then considered you are the weak point that someone else could come in. That's something you guys might understand. Like I see a bit of people drifting off now, but from a cyber perspective, they're not there to protect you. They're to protect everyone from you. And if you understand that, and you can talk to your cyber professional and say, this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it, and this is how we can prevent someone else from being impacted by a problem with us. That's going to go an awful long way to getting you past your cyber audit and review. Quick word on pen tests. This quote is, sorry, it doesn't come up really well. This quote's attributed to a number of people, including Carl Sagan, but I learnt of it from an archaeology TV show called Time Team. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I don't trust pen tests. They're useful. I don't discount the results, but I sure as hell don't rely on them. And the reason is as an infrastructure manager, most of the applications in our environment have to go through a penetration test exercise before they can go live. I can tell how thorough those pen tests are because there are certain issues in the environment that are known and are not unaddressed, and only some of those pen tests pick up those issues. 5 or 6 penetration tests have picked up a known issue out of probably several hundred. Just because you passed a pen test doesn't mean you're safe. The other thing too about penetration tests, this again, life story, application says penetration test has picked up 3 major vulnerabilities in our application and we need to fix them. We've been told we need to fix them before we can go live with the new application version. We fixed one of them and we want to go live. So we're asking permission to go live with 2 major vulnerabilities. Sounds like absolutely crazy, doesn't it? Until you realise that all 3 vulnerabilities that were picked up in the pen test were pre-existing bugs that existed in the current version. Hadn't been picked up by prior penetration tests, and that by releasing buggy code to prod, they're actually closing a major vulnerability. Now, Everyone face palms when they hear that, but it just puts it, yeah, it's the context. It also means that your cyber guys are going to be a lot happier if you can demonstrate the risk. Nearly done. This is where we get into advanced, and this is where I have actually resorted to dealing with a cybersecurity slide. I mentioned before about your representative threat. The term in cybersecurity is lateral movement. When your application gets broken into, it then gets used to break into something else. Your account gets broken into, that then gives them access to a system, that then gets them access to other accounts. So when it comes down to negotiation and sitting down and measuring the threat, it's not the issue in question, it's what that issue could be combined with other issues in the system. I can get onto a web server, doesn't have particular permissions, except there's a firewall access to another system that has a vulnerability that we knew about, but we didn't think was important because it wasn't accessible to the internet. From there, I can run I've got access to run a restore into another system. There are key applications that essentially have God mode. Anything to do with backup recovery. Anyone's worked in storage, I've restored password files onto live production systems so we can get back into them when they have been lost. EDR, I don't know if you've heard of the endpoint detection and response. It's a security product. Think of it like a souped up virus scanner. If you're in a corporate environment, you've got one running on your laptop. Not only will that pick up a virus scan, it allows cyber to go in and make changes in response to a break. That means your cybersecurity guys can go and update any file on any laptop or any server running that EDR tool. I've literally had people drop keys onto my laptop, basically security tokens. If someone tries to use it, it sets off an alarm. It's like, oh, don't worry, downloading the file, we'll just push it out to you. Those things are obviously on the inside, but this cascade chaining, and as soon as you hit those God mode systems, everything is gone. And that's where your crypto lockers really start hitting you, because they will wipe out your backup data. Then they will wipe out your production systems, and you've got no recovery option. And it does happen. People do go after the backups. Okay, finally, to wrap up, there's a couple of themes here around dealing with cybersecurity. I've tried to scare you a lot, but I've also tried to turn around and say, this is the motivation of the guys you're dealing with. So when you turn around and have someone say, well, you can't release to production with this problem, the only reason they're saying no is that's the only option they have. Obviously, it comes down to money. Understand the risks. Understand the risk from a business perspective and from a whole of business perspective, not your application, and find someone who's actually going to make that decision. Treat cybersecurity like a people, not a problem. This is really basic. But how many people roll their eyes when someone like auditor comes in or someone from cyber comes in? Or the example I was going to use is like dealing with someone from the ATO. They're used to people lying to them. They're used to people trying to brush them over. Just simply saying, hi, how are you going? How busy is work been? Is actually really going to go a long way. Understand the situation. What are they trying to protect? What are the threats? What are the pressures are they under? Has the business just had a major breach? Another employee, things like password management and your password cycling. You said don't change the passwords that often, which I agree with, by the way. Another employer had a major breach, data leak, personally customer information went out. What was the problem? Somebody logged on to the system. Well, they automated it. They logged onto a web-based system using a username and password of someone who was legitimately able to use that system, and they just read through every customer's account. Set up a bot, click, 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 and just walk through the entire customer database. Okay, that person shouldn't have used a better password. When you have a system where you have tens of thousands of unique users logging in a day, which I do at the moment, someone is going to stuff up. I put my hand up to stuffing stuff up myself. You have to assume failure. And if a breach like that happens, you can guarantee that any system that's got customer information is going to get a lot of scrutiny. And that's where things are. Listen and understand to what their issues are before responding. Again, it is this basic human detail, but it's just most people are so quick to push aside and say, oh no, that's not an issue because of this. Make sure you understand and acknowledge the problems. Take security seriously. do your infrastructure baselines in your application development. The sooner, if you do things right from the start, you don't have to go back and fix it. Change your oil before your engine blows up. Track and follow up. If you've got a track record of coming back, even if you haven't fixed the bugs, but next time you deal with cyber, you can say, these are the things that were raised last time. What else have you got to add? You've instantly got credibility. They're thinking you're not going to blow off. Read and understand the standards. You'd be surprised how many things I've gotten past simply by saying, well, actually, that's not what the benchmark says. The benchmark says we've got to do X, and you're saying I've got to do X plus Y. For someone that's a checklist, if you can say I've actually done the checklist item, that problem goes away. And when you get to the discussion around, well, this is the business priority, and this is versus the risk, invite them into the discussion, because most of the time they don't get that. Most of the time, cyber say, this is the IT risk, this is the problem we're trying to fix. And that's it. They never find out what happens. They get cut off the discussion, it goes up to management. Management usually sign off on the risk and go, ho-hum, yeah, we've got to hit our business priority, and they get completely cut out of the loop. Okay. Like I said, this is decidedly non-technical. This is about dealing with people, and it's about dealing with politics and organisations. I can talk technical later, but I deliberately structured this to be the direct opposite of what was coming forward. Do people have anything that they would like to ask that I wasn't clear about, or does everyone want to go and get pizza? Okay, we have a question.
On the last slide.
I said on the last slide, I think the last point was invite them into the risk discussion. I guess one of the considerations in bringing them in a bit too early, might be delays to what you're trying to deliver and deploy. So I guess the question I've got is how early is too early and how late is too late?
How early is too early and how late is too late? From a people perspective, I would say there isn't such thing as too early. Again, it's an unforgiving job. I don't know if you've ever, think of the role of an auditor or if you work for the tax office. Your job is to police other people and find fault in what they're trying to do. If you can turn around and say, what do I need to watch out for? What are the business priorities? What are the areas that people have been stuffing up recently? Right at the start, that's a really good thing. It helps them, firstly, they feel valued, they're the discussion, but it also means you find out about the stuff that is going to really hit the roost, the things that are non-negotiable before you start. You don't want cyber going in, and they don't have the time to go in and review every single thing you do, but it helps the priority. Going back to your checklist, what are the standards, what are the benchmarks, what are they looking for? This might not necessarily be as part of a project, but if you understand up front which benchmark they're looking at, and believe me, they're all there and they're all different, at least that information is going to help you. But again, when it gets to the end, you know what you've had to do, and you can turn around and say, I've done X, Y, Z, and I haven't done B because this is the reason. Where I was trying to get to, cyber come in, and a lot of organisations, cyber just lays out the risks, and then that's it, they're off the case. It becomes, there's either really adversarial, or someone goes up to senior management and says, is it worth the risk to proceed or not? If they actually get involved in, this is the business priority, this is the threat, this is the particular vulnerability, but this is what will be required to exploit it, and this is what the potential consequence would be. That's what a cybersecurity professional wants to do. They want to understand that. They want to understand the vulnerability, and they can turn around and then say, well, jumping back to your mitigation, we've got a partial mitigation in place. Yes, somebody could do a privilege escalation, but it's restricted to users that have access to their system, and we have logging in place, so if someone does it, we'll find out after the event. So we're vulnerable, but we've got stuff around to make it not so bad. And there's the flip side, this is the business benefit of doing it. I would say bring them in early, disengage. But when you do bring them in towards whatever your gatekeeping process is, and it almost is a gatekeeping process, keep them involved as the discussion in terms of the fixes are, because they could actually go into bat, and they could actually help downgrade some of those risks if they can see what propping you put in place. Is there anybody else?
In one of your recommendations, you had a point that we should follow up for all the risk that we have taken after the project is released. So most of the time in practice, that once the development and the production has happened, the release has happened, the team gets disbanded and they get moved to another places.
Yeah, 100%. This is partly organisational, but yes, the team gets disbanded. Someone's got to deal with those risks. Usually there will be someone, an operations manager, an application owner, that maintains that. So if your job is to build and get it through and then move over to the next project, there's probably not a lot you can do there. Think for a project closure report. You hand over to operations, or whatever your end of project stuff is to detail these are the outstanding security issues that weren't resolved and handed over. Then at least you've got the credibility to stand up in front and say, we haven't done everything you've asked us to, but we haven't ignored you either. From my side, I'm the guy that is stuck with things. I stand projects up and deal with them when they're finished. I maintain that list, and so next time I've got a conversation with cyber, I can say, this is everything this is what was outstanding at the end. These are the things that have been fixed in the meantime, and these are the things we're going to fix as part of the next project. And it shows people that they're not wasting their time. They're not screaming into the air. You haven't taken their work, scrunched it up into a ball and thrown it out. And again, that's that people, valuing them as people, and just basic integration in an organisation that's valuable. But it also means if the auditors come knocking, and again, I'm in the situation at the moment, I know there's stuff out there the auditors are not going to be happy with. But at the same time, I can pull something out and say, here is a list of everything we know about that we're not happy with, and we prioritise these things to be fixed and these things to not. And my management knows what those issues are and what they're rated. What's an auditor going to do? Okay, they release a finding. Well, they're not going to write anything in the audit report that isn't already in the risk register, that isn't already visible to my management. I can't be held accountable for that. But yeah, it is, when you're running a project, it is really tricky. Anybody else? Cool. If anyone's got questions or just would like to understand something that I've said that isn't very clear, feel free to hit me up afterwards, but thank you very much.
Fantastic presentation, Dave and Owen, both of you. I do appreciate it. If you've got any questions at all for these guys, please feel free to go and ask them personally. And I believe Dave has got some giveaways as well for that, so this is an opportunity for you guys to do that and get those AWS goodies. Apart from that, I won't be wasting much of your time. Look, I apologize, for whatever happened at the security. It did take time, but we've got some pizzas to make up for it. Well, in all seriousness though, this is a recorded event, so it's going to be uploaded on YouTube for you guys, whoever has missed. I do have just one thing for you guys. So now for 2024, essentially what we as a user group are trying to do is we are trying to empower you guys to be able to decide what topics are going to be presented throughout this year. So for that, I will be displaying a QR code which will be displayed outside itself on the projector itself, so you don't have to we don't have to wait for you guys having your pizzas. We will be, it's a multiple choice thingy. Just scan the QR code, answer a few. I think it's a pretty comprehensive list which have included all the topics or whatever you guys want for this year. It really would help us to understand what you guys want from us. And yeah, that's about it. And if there's any questions, again, I say, please go and ask Dave and Owen personally. Apart from that, thank you all for coming in. I again wish you all a very happy New Year. I hope your New Years are going well. And yeah, I will see you guys next month. Cheers.